There's a world out there, it's a digital maze where dollars move in mysterious ways. Complex systems, rules, and regulations. The payments professor sparks revelations. No need to fear the Fed now.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the Payments Podium. I'm the Payments Professor, and today, we're going to check into checks. And to be able to check in what's happening with checks, check this out. I know I've had enough bad puns to get us started, but to really get us started, I have Steve Cree with me. Steve, I'd like to welcome you to the Payments Podium. Would you say hi to everybody?
Well, hello, everyone. I'm glad you were able to join us today.
All right, Steve, you may not know this, but everybody who joins the Payments Podium the first time, the way we get the conversation started is we ask them the magic question. And the magic question is, how in the world did you end up working in electronic payments? Because as we know, very few people grow up playing electronic payments. You know, you might play cops and robbers, things like that, but nobody sits there and goes, I'm going to play electronic checks when they're a little kid. So how did you end up in the world of electronic payments?
Well, I'll tell you, I got out of college and I went out. I was getting ready to take my master's. And someone said, you should go out and have informational interviews to see if you actually want to go into your master's or not. And so I went around and talked to a number of different firms. And one of the firms was looking for someone to get involved in the financial industry and deal with banks, savings and loans, credit unions, and talk to them about various systems that were out. At this time, it was with one of the major manufacturers of mainframe computers, because everything was a mainframe computer back then. And so that's really how I got my start in it, that went from an informational interview to them saying, hey, we want to hire you.
So you started off more like mainframes and working on that side of the industry?
Yeah, I started in 1983. And so in 1983, the PC had just been released. Right. And so everything was mainframe based. And so we had I dealt with check processing and also with the data processing systems.
Okay, so that's where you started off, dealing with back mainframes, check processing, data processing. And now what do you do? Where are you working now? What do you do now?
So now I work for the clearinghouse in the Echo line of business. And what I oversee is I see the Echo rules and their governance.
Okay, the Echo Rules. I almost feel like I should have grabbed my Echo Rules book. I got it sitting over here on the shelf right here beside me, and just to be able to show people, I might have to do that actually. Now, it's funny, too, for those of you who are listening, we have a podcast on who Echo is. We also have a podcast on the NCP, which is the National Check Professional Certification. I highly encourage everybody to go learn more about those. Now, having you on here today, it's interesting because there's a couple of questions I want to ask you. One of them, it's funny because I get all these inquiries, people asking, hey, get somebody on the podcast to talk about this, talk about this. And there's two of them questions. It's like, I don't know. Do I ask you about check fraud, or do I just ask you simply, what's a check, and is a check still relevant? Because that's what I hear in the industry. Some of us, like you and I, we've been around for a little while, and we understand the check is a powerful tool. And I think people miss that. I think people are missing today just how powerful the tool is. And I got to say, I'm guilty. I make fun of checks. I do. I'm guilty. And I realize I need to quit doing that sometimes because I think people don't realize the power of a check. And if you don't mind, could we maybe go there and explain what a check really is and why it's still relevant today?
Well, I think the check is the Rodney Dangerfield of payment systems. And so, as I said, in 1983, I first got into this, and check was a major portion of what I did. In those days, credit unions had just been deregulated. We saw check volumes just going up exponentially. And I remember about a year into it, I went to a conference, and they had one of these big industries experts there talking about payment systems. And that was the first time that I heard that check was going to die. Check is in the process of dying. By the year 2000, we will no longer have checks. Well, certainly it's 25 years after that, and we're still actively going after checks. So Check is relevant. Yes, we are seeing a reduction in the number of checks. We've been seeing that for a number of years in the 3 to 5% range, that the volume number of items are decreasing. And you can see that the Federal Reserve releases some studies that you can see that on. But here's the key to it is that it has changed in that it's no longer about just the volume of items that we're going through. Now it's about really what are the total dollars going through that. And the total dollars going through the check channel are roughly equivalent to what they were 10 years ago. And there was no one who said 10 years ago that check was not relevant. And I think that's important to understand because, 25, 30 years ago, it really mattered exactly the number of checks we handled because everything was manual. You had to pick up every single check, look at it, key in the dollar amount, and drop it into a machine to encode that dollar amount on it.
Wait. I want to hit on one important topic, though, because you said checks were declining. So there's not that many checks out there, but aren't there actually billions of checks still being processed every year? I mean, billions of checks being processed. And if we go to dollar values, isn't it in the trillions of dollars that are still being processed?
Yes. And so it is still significant in what is going through. And, when you look at when check was at its peak, the number of checks that we were writing, well, it takes a whole lot of years at 3 to 7% for it to go away. Now, certainly we've seen some aspects go away. So, consumers, for instance, have very heavily modified their habits and have gone to other payment systems. But they still have certain use cases. So, for instance, I used to hear all the time that, millennials don't write checks. Well, I was really surprised when my two daughters in 1 year, about 6 months apart, gave me a call and said, "Hey, Dad, how do you take and reorder check?" And I said, "Reorder check? You had like 500 checks." "Oh, what? I thought you're a millennial. You don't use checks, right?" And well, no, there were certain use cases they liked it.
Yeah, where did they write 500 checks? Because that right away raises red flags for me.
Well,
where are they writing 500 checks?
now they had gotten the 500 checks, a number of years earlier, but I thought that would be a lifetime supply of checks for them. But yet they had certain things that they were liking to pay with checks, things such as their rent, their utilities, a lot of things like that they were paying with checks because if it came across that. It came up that they weren't paid the utility, it was real easy to burn a copy of the check, send it over to them and say, well, that sure seems to be your endorsement on the back of the check. And so in fact, it has instant proof of payment on it. So, that's one of the things that we've seen is there's certain use cases that across the board people are using it. In addition, we're all doing bill pay now. Well, guess what? If there's not an easy way for that to get out, an electronic way to get out to the institution or vendor that you're paying, what do? In the background, they print off a check and send it to them. And so many times we're using checks and we don't even know it.
Well, it's actually funny when you bring up use cases and checks. It's one of my favorite questions to ask even payments professionals. I wonder if you'll get this one too, because I love this one. There is actually one use case with a check that can never be replaced by any other payment channel. And you're going to love this. Can you think of one use case that no matter what, no other payment channel could ever replace the check in? You ready for this?
I am.
The payment you don't want to ever be processed.
Well, think of how many birthday checks go out that never get processed.
Exactly. Because I thought about that and having a conversation because I realized once there was a time, grandma and grandpa give me a check. And my grandma and grandpa, when they were giving me checks, didn't have a whole lot of money, And I was like, I'm not cashing this.
So they felt good because they wrote you a good sized check, and yet it's somehow never created paying for them. And so.
But I also think about it too, is that's the other thing is I tell people, I love I love instant payments. I'm known for instant payments. And I even said, I'm the bad uncle who is actually known for, it's Christmas Eve. I need to send some money. Okay. But I can see where too, when it comes to, I can write the check. It's, there's some tangibility to being able to do something with that and giving it that, it's still, there's a tangibility aspect to it that I love.
You bet. And certainly, no, I agree 100%. Electronic payments, all these forms have their places. Of course, back in the early 80s when I heard check was going away, the one at that time was ACH. ACH was the new guy on the block, and ACH volumes were going up, and they said ACH is going to make check go away. Well, we've had multiple types of payment mechanisms that have come out since then, and each one has their own unique situations where they can be used. But check still is there. One of the nice things about check is with check, I can meet someone for the first time today and perhaps buy something from them. I don't know them, and I can easily, that vendor, I can write out a check and give it to them. They don't have to have any information on me. I don't have to have any information on them. Rather, I can just write them a check, give it to them, and the payment's been made. Now, up in the Northwest, where I'm from, we see a number of people going back to check. And so, for instance, I had my travel trailer worked on, and it was about $1,800 when I went in, and I pulled out a credit card. And they said, oh, well, you can pay with a credit card, but we're going to charge you a surcharge for doing that. Yep. And I said, well, what do you take? And they said, well, we'll take cash or check. And I said, well, I don't carry $1,800 in cash on me. And but luckily I had my checkbook. So I went ahead and paid for it with check. And so we do see segments and vendors that are getting back into the check space because they're working on tighter and tighter margins.
Well, and it's funny you bring that up too, because I studied the history of checks, going back to the check, even, in the Mideastern times, the 300 BC Mideastern times, folks, if you really want to go how far back, some checks go. There's Amsterdam in the 1700s where we get what we know to be the common check. I get actually 1600s that to be the common check, but it goes way back. And the whole idea was nobody wants to carry around that much currency. Exactly. It's safe. But going back to today, we said, your daughters are an anomaly, reordering and doing that many checks for that generation. Where are all these checks being written then? Because you also said they're high value checks. Where are all these checks that are being written?
Yeah, well, and to your point, the checks are getting higher and higher in dollar volume, and in the dollar amount per check. The value of an individual check, the average is going up. And so, right now it's around $2,700 per check. That's the reason why we can have the volume number of checks going down at the same time that the total dollar amount going through the channel stays the same. So a lot of these are being written by businesses. And so businesses have stayed very heavily into it, especially mid-size and smaller businesses. Check works for them, right? Their systems are already hooked up to be able to produce checks to pay their vendors. There are a number of new types of electronics systems that they can look at, that can hook up to. But for right now, they have limited resources, and the check works for them. So, do I spend X number of dollars on ramping up this new payment system when I don't have a problem? Or do I use that same number of dollars to create a new product that I can get revenue off of? And what I'm hearing is more and more of them are doing the latter. They're using those limited resources to enhance their product set and therefore the revenue rather than looking for new ways to pay.
Well, okay, when you say works for them too, because that's something that I have to explain to people a lot of times is, from a business perspective, the thing that gets overlooked is a business has, especially the larger businesses, what we call accounts receivable, accounts payable departments. And those accounts receivable, accounts payable departments, when they're making payments, they have to account for that payment, where it's going to, where it's coming from. I always use the example of electric companies. Electric companies, money coming in, they got to make sure that money goes to the right account and gets paid to the right account. And a check just works to be able to do that because it comes in with the bill, with the remittance slip, or it's got at least, hopefully the memo line tells the account on it too, or in the accounts going out to make the payments, it goes with the invoices that go there. So it's easy because, like you also said, the systems they've been using, which some of them, they are decade-old systems, even in some cases,
Yeah.
they have been built around the check.
Exactly. The check was always the standard, right? For years and years and years, the check was the standard. As a matter of fact, where did we go in the different financial institutions to get payment experts when we started ramping up these other channels? Well, we went to check, right? We knew where the payment expertise was at. It was in the item processing department, day one and day two. And so we pulled people out of those departments and put them in these other departments as we were ramping up. So for these different application softwares, check was the standard of something you had. Other types of things were things that you threw in that were extra features, but a check was a basic of what you had to be able to do.
Well, I got to tell you, one thing, if it weren't for this, I would be gone with the check. But there's one thing that I do love, because I remember back in my day, and you can remember this too, I'm sure, I would go deposit a check and I just did not know when it was going to clear. And I'd have to go somewhere to deposit the check, and it would take forever. But nowadays, I got my handy dandy phone. I can grab my phone. I can take a picture of my check. I don't actually have to go to the financial institution. Remote deposit capture. I mean, I will admit, I have made a career out of remote deposit capture. I have put kids through college, paid for the ex-wife's house, all that stuff with remote deposit capture. I think it's wonderful and a game changer too.
Well, it really is. As we went to image, what we called image in those days, now what we call electronic checks, and the processing of those, all of a sudden we said, well, why does the customer have to come into the branch anymore? That's not needed. And so, we originally had merchant capture and tested that with very experienced merchants. We rolled it out into image ATMs that we could go ahead and capture the checks in the ATMs. And now to mobile. And so that, some of the times a bank's whole relationship with a customer is now online from the time that they set up an account to the time that they take a capture with their mobile device of that initial check that funds the account. And so it really has changed the face of the financial industry today.
It has. And, there's something else that you did also just mention, which is that payments expertise, that check expertise. And you and I have talked before about this. And, one of the things that people who follow the Payments Professor podcast will ask is, what can I do to improve my career? Things like that. What is, I almost want to say the next big concern in the check industry when it comes to what's happening when it comes to check expertise. What's happening in that area right now?
Well, unfortunately, check expertise is leaving the industry. And so as we've transitioned to image, and as these other payment methods have gone up, this concept that the check is going away has gotten stronger and stronger with time. And so about 15 years ago, we really saw a real change. And it was always talked about check going away. But about 15 years ago, I think many of the organizations started truly believing that the imminent demise of the check was near. And so what they stopped doing is investing in it. And so you had various vendors who stopped investing in it. They started looking in other areas. You had in the financial institutions, traditionally you had kind of three levels of expertise within your financial institution. You had your real check experts, the people who had been doing it for years. You had your second bench. They were the ones that were preparing for when they needed to take over for that check expert. And then you had a third bench. These were your people who really looked to be potential stars down the road. And so you had those three levels that you were working with and developing over the years. Well, all of a sudden they stopped developing the third bench. The third bench was graduating into 15 years ago into being the second bench. People were retiring, and so the second bench was becoming the first bench. And so you only have those two. But guess what? 15 years ago, the check didn't go away very quickly. It's 15 years later. We now have a situation where that first bench is gone, and that second bench is now the experts within the organization, and we see them starting to leave. And so I call it the three R's: retirement, And so you have these people 25, 35 years in check and they're retiring out. We have relocation. We already talked about when these new fancy and cutting edge technologies come out for payment systems. Where do you get your payment professional? You go to your check department and you grab them out of there. So you lose a certain amount of experts. And then, of course, at COVID, we had a lot of just resignations that came at and after COVID. And we're still experiencing that because, again, we don't have a strong second or third bench that are going ahead and feeding this. So we see a lot of challenges within the industry. Because of this.
Correct me if I'm wrong. We're not saying there's not check experts out there. There are check experts out there. And without a doubt, what we actually are saying, there's an actual opportunity out there. Because, I know there's a lot of fintechs out there. There's a lot of entrepreneurs out there. I even get to talk to a lot of college students. They'll call me up and be like, hey, can you help me learn this? Help me with that. And they're like, where could I go as a career path? And they've laughed at me almost. I'm like, believe it or not, there's some major opportunities in checks. Major opportunities out there in checks still.
Yeah, we still have a lot of volume going through checks, and it doesn't seem like like check is going to be gone anytime real soon. It's really going to have to take something major for check to go away because it is entrenched and people like using it. Again, what we have to understand is for the people who are using check, it's very simple for them to use check. Now, on the alternate side, right, though, for the financial institution to actually process and handle exceptions with a check, that is not easy, right? You look at ACH. ACH has been around since the late 70s. Well, you only have so many years of ACH rules and cases. As you already talked about, check's been around since the 1600s. One of the major rules that we have in check around counterfeit and forged maker being on the paying bank's side, responsibility to catch those, goes back to a court case in 1762, Price versus Neal. That's a long time ago.
NPPs around the world are clapping right now for that. Price versus Neal, yes.
Yes. And so, when you have hundreds of years worth of court cases, rules, laws, all of that type of thing, all of a sudden it takes a certain amount of expertise to be able to do it correctly. And so, yes, if you are an expert in check, and we still have experts out there, so don't let me say that we don't, but we just don't have the number of them that we used to have. And so I remember about 10 years ago talking to someone at the Fed, and he said, it used to be in a half an hour, I could put together a virtual call with 50 check experts at the Federal Reserve Bank. He said, now it might take me all day to get 3.
Wow. So again, it's an opportunity. It's a major opportunity for anybody out there. And I mean, another thing is, I mentioned we could probably talk about check fraud, and we're definitely not going to have time to talk about check fraud. Check fraud, payments fraud, period, is a issue that will never go away. Mark my words. It'll never go away. Wherever money's involved, fraud will always be there. And it's always evolving, always changing. And if you want to have a career that will never go away, work in fraud. And the fact is, if you learn, I think you need to learn all payments. I think if you know a little bit about all payments, that's what will help you to be able to understand all payment channels. Knowing one doesn't help you if you don't understand the others. That's my opinion.
Exactly. And check has always been, the item processing department's always been a entry into a financial institution. Once you have that mastered, there's not many departments that item processing doesn't touch throughout the bank. And so it was easy to migrate across. I think we have the same thing because of the complexity of check. When you really understand the components of check and how it works, it's very easy to transfer into other areas of the bank. So if check ever were to go away, as a young person who knows it very well, it's not going to be very hard to transfer to a different part of the industry.
I have to say this. Once you can figure out all of check processing, the rest of the payment channels really are easy.
All you have to do is take the NCP to figure that one out in comparison to some of the other certifications.
I mean, it's okay. In one hand, I'll say it is complicated and it's scary, but once it starts to make sense, once you sit down and you start figuring out the structure of how you apply UCC3 and when and where, and UCC4 and when and where, and UC or ECHO rules and when and where and how, once it all does start to make sense, I will say from going through that process, and love her to death, Phyllis Meyerson, she was a mentor of mine, and the thing she taught me to this day, I still hear her voice in the back of my head. I can't do her New York accent. I can apply what she taught me to other payment channels, and it has helped me to become the payments expert that I have become today because of learning some of that.
Yeah, it really is. It's important. And so education is one of those things that you really need to look at actively pursuing the education around check. Look at the certification. The NCP certification. What that's going to do is that's going to give you that very strong foundation of understanding. And so when things are happening, all of a sudden you understand that foundation. You can use your experience to build that expertise even further.
Well, Steve, I wasn't sure what, I thought we were going to talk about check fraud. We didn't talk about check fraud. I wanted to be able to help people understand checks are relevant, very relevant. I think you get that point across. I really have one more important question. And that is, for those people that are listening, you've had an incredibly successful career. I've looked at what you've done since 1983 for where you've been, what you've been able to accomplish. And we're seeing people coming into the industry. What would you tell somebody coming into the industry today that they should do to be able to be even half the success that you've had? What advice would you give to somebody coming into the industry today that you would tell them, if you want to be successful in this industry, here's the blueprint. This is what you need to do.
So the first thing you have to do is find out where you have a passion. Develop a passion, because a passion is something that helps you, that you would do it even if you're not getting paid, right? And the passion also makes it so that you want to learn everything about it. And that's really the important thing, is continual learning. Someone once told me something their grandfather had told them, and it was, when you think you're green, you're still growing. When you think you're ripe, you're really rotten. And so what you need to understand is every day you can learn something new. Every single day, there's going to be something new. The environment has changed. The product has changed. Something has changed. The consumer has changed how they want to do something. And so every single day, make sure that you learn something. When you leave work for that day, you learn something that you didn't know yesterday. And if you continue in that vein and have a passion to do that, you'll be successful.
Well, Steve, I got to tell you, I learned something new today. I got a couple of things out of this. First of all, one of the main things I got to say is the check is like Rodney Dangerfield of payments, but it's, instead of I get no respect, I get no recheck. Hey, bad jokes are free all day long, folks. I want to thank you for being here today. And for all of you paying attention that are out there, you can go watch the podcast on NCP. You can go watch the podcast on who ECHO is to learn more about it. And if you're looking to expand your careers and learn more about electronic payments, and maybe there's a subject or maybe there's somebody you think needs to be on the payments podium that could help you, just get a hold of me, Kevin@paymentsprofessor.com. I will do my best to make sure that subject gets covered, that person gets on the payments podium, because we are here to do what we can to make learning about all this stuff in electronic payments fun and entertaining whenever we can. But we're really here to help you and help your careers to be able to advance. But this is the part where I get to say, class dismissed.
There's a world out there, it's a digital maze where dollars move in mysterious ways. Complex systems, rules, and regulations. The payments professor sparks revelations.